Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, both here in Madrid and also online. As far as I've been informed, we are around 400 people really interested on models. So I think that's a great achievement to start with this afternoon. We're going to discuss about the future of internal models. I really think it's a very interesting and timely topic. All of us that work in banks and been dealing with IRB models, we have a long experience by now. And I was commenting with our colleagues that we'll see in the panel, has been a tough job so far. But we will share those experiences because I think there are also good news and good achievements along the way. As the regulatory and risk landscape continues to evolve, banks are faced with important strategic decisions regarding the future role of internal models. A key question is how to strike the right balance between the internal ratings-based IRB approach and the standardized approach, both from an industry and regulatory standpoint. I think any entity at this point in time is thinking about this topic. At the same time, rapid technological progress, including the rise of AI, machine learning, is set to influence the direction of model development and supervisory expectations in the years to come. In this context, we are so honored to open the session with a keynote by Stephen Wolf, Head of Division at the European Central Bank, who will share key regulatory perspective and supervisory trends shaping model development and validation in the context of a more efficient and effective supervision, reducing unnecessary complexity and maintaining the resilience of European banks is really a very important topic. I have to say that Stephen was head of JST for Santander for many years, and I have the pleasure to be around in that time and have passionate discussions on risk appetite by then. So thank you for that. Then this will be followed by a panel discussion with leading industry experts. We'll have Ruth Manso, Group Head of Credit Risk Internal Validation at Santander. Also Ricardo García Martín, Global Head of GRM Data and Analytics at BBVA. Remy Emme, Managing Director, Regulatory Watch Basel III at Societe Generale. And also remotely, Arjan de Ridder, Global Head of Model Risk Management at ING. The panel will be moderated by Ángel Mencía, an independent senior advisor in model risk and regulation and former Group Chief Model Risk Management Officer at Santander and a good friend of mine. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight one key initiative. We are also launching a short industry survey to gather views on the future of internal models. Your input in this regard will help us save a more collective and representative perspective from across the industry. So thank you for your collaboration in this end. With that, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Mr. Stephen Wolf for the keynote address. Stephen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
The resilience of European banks. We also strive to reduce unnecessary complexity to facilitate greater focus on material issues. In 2023, an external review of our supervisory process underscores the need for reform. In response, the ECB Banking Supervision launched several initiatives aimed at making our supervision more efficient, effective, and risk-based. These reforms are not administrative adjustments. They will make a difference to you and to us. Why? Because as supervisors, we can now concentrate better our efforts on risks that we identify as the most important priorities to resolve. And for banks, you'll have more latitude to resolve the other issues we identify in terms of approach, resource allocation, both at staff and senior levels, as you see fit, of course, within supervisory deadlines. 10 years into the life of the SSM, as we navigate an increasingly complex financial landscape, our ability to adapt, refine, and improve our supervisory practices is paramount. So, this is a continuation of our efforts to have a more streamlined and impactful supervision. It is not new. One of the areas where we are implementing further improvement is through what we are calling internally a tiered approach to supervisory findings and measures. While it may not be a topic widely known, it comes within the umbrella of the SHERP reform objectives and the project plan covering wise person group recommendations. This approach aligns with our broader goal of improving efficiency and refocusing on adopting a risk-based perspective in all aspects of supervision. So what is this new approach and how will it impact industry? As many of you know, the backbone of our supervisory work is identifying shortcomings, or findings, in a timely manner. Our job as supervisors is to ensure that banks take appropriate measures to address them. Just for context, during 2024, the SSM identified around 8,000 findings. These range from relatively minor F1s to very material F4s. To close a finding, a bank must execute an action plan, embed the change in their organization, then present evidence to allow supervisors to validate the finding has been addressed. The current process requires detailed verification of each element regardless of severity, which can be resource intensive for both banks and supervisors. Moreover, up to this point, it could be argued the process has not taken a balanced approach to materiality of the various issues. The need for a more efficient and balanced approach has become evident. By reassessing our processes, we aim to ensure that our focus is directed towards the most pressing issues, those that pose significant risks to the stability and integrity of the banking sector. This shift reflects our commitment to a more risk-based oriented approach, ensuring that our efforts are concentrated where they are needed most. From July 2025, our joint supervisory teams will implement this new tiered approach to the follow-up of findings and measures. By categorizing findings into tiers, we can allocate our resources more judiciously, concentrating our efforts on the more severe issues, classifying them as F3s and F4s. This targeted focus allows us to enhance the overall impact of our supervisory activities. For less severe findings, the F1 and F2s will be accompanied by a reminder to comply, which is going to resonate with many of you from the model landscape, or a reminder to address. With banks expected to address these autonomously, closing findings directly themselves on the ECB systems. As you can see, with this approach, we are placing our trust in the banks to address these issues without extensive interaction with supervisors. This will result in very tangible workload reductions for banks. But as is often the case, with the dreaded word trust is swiftly followed by responsibility, and banks will no longer have the safety net of the supervisor to validate their efforts. This change is also empowering for banks. They can demonstrate their commitment to robust internal governance over closure of findings and encourages a culture of proactive risk management. This rebalance between empowerment and oversight is designed to foster an environment where respective trust by the supervisor and responsibility of the industry is fully understood. But trust is a strange thing, sometimes hard to get, but even harder to regain if lost. While we are allowing the direct closure of low severity findings, the integrity of their process remains intact. Banks will be required to retain and maintain evidence on how these issues were addressed for up to 5 years, allowing supervisors to sample check as needed. We will also check from time to time, and a failure in governance will be considered a material finding itself. To conclude, the benefits of this approach are manifold. We enhance the overall effectiveness of our supervision by focusing our resources on the most material shortcomings. We reduce workload that is there today for industry by virtue of removing extensive oversight on non-material issues, which I'm sure you will appreciate. And we reduce the administrative effort for both banks and supervisors, which allows for a greater focus on material issues. This should aid ensuring resilience of the banking sector at large. The approach is a tangible example of our commitment to identifying ways to improve. It is a win-win situation that aligns our strategic objective of effective risk-based supervision while doing so in an efficient manner for both supervisors and the industry. As we implement these changes, we remain dedicated to safeguarding the stability of the banking sector. By focusing on what truly matters, the most material findings, we ensure that our supervisory efforts are impactful and aligned with the evolving needs of the financial system. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos. Estoy muy contento de estar aquí en Madrid. My Spanish is not nearly good enough to talk about internal models in any way, shape or form. And in fact, I'm not sure anybody's Spanish is good enough to talk about internal models, and everyone tends to use IRB regardless of the language. My job here today is, first of all, to say thank you to the panelists, and thank you, Mr. Catena and Stephen. We worked together a long time ago on the same side of the table, and let me tell you that Stephen, I'm sure any of you who've worked with him know that he is as accomplished a supervisor as there is. Can you come with me? The microphone.
You are arrested.
Was I understandable?
Yeah.
I try to speak slowly.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Sometimes I speak too fast, so I have to concentrate on speaking slowly.
Okay. Now, I can absolutely promise you that what I'm about to say was not worth the wait. It is not that interesting, but I appreciate the patience. What we want to talk about here today actually is really well connected to Stephen. I know he said that he wasn't going to talk about models, but I think everyone who works in this industry, and yes, I'm as shocked as you that there are 400 people who are interested in models, that the community is that large. But the number of findings that exist in financial institutions, in banks, there's a huge amount of them related to models. So this is really well connected to what we want to talk about, and also the practicalities of it. And even before this supervisory evolution that Stephen has outlined, we've been aware for quite some time that this is a really important topic of discussion. So why are we having this event? It's exactly that reason. People are asking us the question about IRB versus standardized. People are asking us about whether there's unintended consequences. What is the evolution of supervisory thinking? What's the evolution of thinking within banks? And that's all in the context of where is the world going to? So personally, if you asked me the question about IRB versus standardized a decade ago, I would say you're crazy to even think about turning off IRB models, because it would be looked at so dimly by your stakeholders, external investors, other investors, supervisors, because it would be seen as prima facie evidence of an inability to model a risk that you're supposed to be managing. I think those days are gone, right? There's a complexity there that's placing a huge burden on institutions that may well have passed, and it might be the period of where things need to become a bit more simple, a bit more efficient, but also when we're on the verge of major change, right? I don't think anyone can imagine that there will be IRB models developed in the next decade that won't have AI and large learning and machine learning at the heart of them, right? So we've got to embrace that and embrace it in a way that makes things better from a supervisory perspective. We also have to pay deference to you that we will manage the risk properly, Steve, but also do our job as well as we can. So I think that's our perspective. That's why we're having this event. And I'll hand to Daniel to introduce our really illustrious panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwayne. Oh, thank you. We leave operational risk. Let's see. Well, before we move into the panel discussion, let me briefly introduce the main themes that we will be exploring with our panel experts. During this afternoon, or people who are connected from the other side of the Atlantic during this morning. Well, first is IRB strategy. How banks are reassessing IRB models versus standardized models, and what it means for portfolio decisions, regulatory discussions, and also IFRS 9 alignment. Secondly, model governance, risk management, and monetary performance. How banks are efficiently, and this work with this word has been mentioned before, and I think is going to be mentioned across the event. How banks are efficiently monitoring model performance, responding to recalibration triggers, and managing model complexity with governance and risk frameworks. And third one, advanced modeling, data, low default portfolios, including the adoption of Gen AI and machine learning, the use of external data, and specific modeling challenges associated with low default portfolios. In parallel to today's event, we have launched an industry survey, a questionnaire. We have been launched 2 months ago. We think we are going to gather a lot of information today in the next few weeks. So we would like to encourage you to take part of this questionnaire. And finally, moderating this panel, we brought in Ángel Mencía. He's senior financial expert with over 30 years experience at BBVA, ECB, where he helped launch the SSM, Single Supervisory Mechanism, and co-chaired the ABA, European Banking Association Task Force in Model Validation. More recently, at Banco Santander, where he has served as Group Chief Model Risk Officer until the end of 2024. So let me summarize about Ángel. He knows very well the panel expert. He knows the topic and the regulatory and bank's perspective. And even he knows this building because he used to work here for 10 years in the 5th floor. So please, Ángel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much also for summarizing a bit introduction, because I think the panelists have been introduced already, and also the main areas we will cover. We have Arjan, the reader from ING, remotely, and the rest of the people are here. So Jen, BBVA, and Santander here. So we have these, let's say, 3 blocks of questions. And although we would like to have some flexibility, of course, in debating, we have to stick to the timeline. So timekeeping is important. I will interrupt you in case you speak too much, because I understand this is also about simplification, the way we give the answer. So let's start with the IRB strategy. We can start with you, Ruth, for instance, talking about the right balance between IRB, foundation, standard approaches. What are the main reasons there in deciding, and the key drivers leading the banks in the decision to stay in each of these approaches?
Thank you, Angel, and thank you for being here today. So I would say that there's no a unique answer valid for all entities. It depends on the composition, situation, whether they're unique located and multi-located, and also due to the characteristics of the portfolios that are intended to go to IRB. So things that had happened since we started, as Wade was saying before, from the beginning of the IRB and today, is that we had in the past a very specific percentage that ECB and local central banks were expecting on IRB percentage to be run to IRB in terms of risk-weighted asset and EAD. It's not the situation today, but the ECB is expecting a objective strategy in IRB. So taking this into account, some variables that need to be taken in consideration is the modelability of the portfolios, the composition. Again, if there's a changeable portfolio again and again, it's going to be more difficult to be modeled. Also, information is a key driver. We don't want too many MOCs or margins of conservatism in terms of quantification. And for so, looking to first roll out the impact in P&L should be one of the key drivers as well.
Okay, thank you. I
No
think
way.
we can continue with you, Remy, regarding the regulatory direction. What kind of influence we are getting from regulators in this decision to decide where to stay?
Yeah. For us, we start with a situation where a large part of our portfolios were already IRB model. I think it's the same thing with other French banks. So for us, the issue is more a simplification of the model landscape, in which simplification we started thinking about a standardized approach on some models. So it starts with an approach model by model, where sometimes it just doesn't seem to make sense to try to maintain IRB models. But I will also agree with Ruth that ECB is insisting on a global strategy that makes sense. In some cases, we've been waiting now for over 3 years to revert to standardize, but we have to wait until the global strategy is approved, which is a very difficult exercise for the bank, because when you look at the global picture, you can appreciate the variety of businesses and the difficulty in defining an approach that works for the whole bank. And you always have, I was part of an exchange with one of our foreign subsidiaries in Eastern Europe. They have their own views, and they also have their own regulators with different views. So you have to combine all these people together and try to present a global strategy that makes sense. So we're still waiting for
Then this question is for you, Ricardo. This is the most beautiful concept for banks, flexibility. What kind of flexibility you can have in deciding, what kind of supervisory dialogue you have with your JST, with the supervisor. Especially relevant, I think it depends on the bank's situation regarding the IRB starting point in terms of IRB coverage. So I think this view is also interesting for the people here. What's your view on these things?
Yeah, I think that the situation has clearly evolved. In the past, moving from IRB to standardized could be perceived by the supervisor and by internal stakeholders as a step back. And now the situation has clearly changed. And there are two points that I think that my colleagues already mentioned. There is one about CRR3, the need for having an IRB strategy defined at exposure class level, forgetting or putting aside the coverage ratio in terms of EAD and risk-weighted assets, and also new mechanisms whereby the reverse into less sophisticated approach can be streamlined, like Article 494D. And the second is the clear message from the supervisor in terms of simplification. When IRB doesn't make sense, when IRB is too costly, overly complex, then there is that room for reverting to less sophisticated approaches or to standardized method. So this is quite new, and we'll have to see how that works in practice. but it's promising. And to your point, Angel, about supervisory GST interaction and dialogue across or along the way, I personally believe that this is quite critical. So an IRB strategy is something further than or goes beyond modeling. We are talking about capital allocation, capital efficiency. We are talking about business strategy, landscape, competitive landscape, and hence that interaction with the GST is super beneficial and can help also managing expectations on both sides, on the supervisory and also on the bank.
Okay, thank you. Arjan, your turn. Regarding business, I would like you to elaborate a bit on the relationship between these regulatory capital models and the impact on portfolios, and if this is the right approach or it should be the other way around. What's your view on that and the potential interactions that it can have in business?
Hello, good afternoon. You can hear me?
Mm.
The yes or no?
Now, it works.
That's a delay. Okay, thanks. Thank you for having me. Sorry that I cannot be there. I will be in Madrid next week, but that's just 1 week too late. On the portfolio strategy, in my view, portfolio strategy should drive the model strategy, normally not the other way around. So, in my view, if you want to grow a portfolio, then you should consider having IRB models. If you want to decrease the size of the portfolio, don't bother. But you also asked a question on the impact on IFRS 9. And I think that's an interesting one. At least in many cases, our IFRS 9 models are an adjustment of our IRB models. But with our simplification, that no longer holds. But that also gives us much more flexibility in how do we model portfolios. Now the key question comes also to the expectations from the regulators. Are they gonna, if they conclude, well, you cannot model certain portfolios, as Ruud already indicated, what are then the expectations on IFRS 9? So that's, I think, a fairly interesting conversation on what is good enough for IFRS 9 purposes in the view of our external auditor, but ECB is also has quite high expectations here as well. And that's going to be a challenge in the coming years with less IRB models.
Okay, I think we can move to the second block of questions regarding model governance, risk management, performance monitoring. Sorry, Ruud, I will start with you again. Regarding the kind of KPIs you use, you think are useful for you to determine when model needs recalibration or redevelopment. In terms of monitoring, what you do when you detect something and how this is run in terms of process.
So, in my opinion, given the extensive use of models through the organizations, we need to be careful on how much do we change models. Because in terms of resources dedication on this can be tremendous. So going from the less to the most changeable in the models, it should be the strategy to be followed. So first of all, monitoring is a key piece in the management of the models and should prevail before any other action. Afterwards, if there's something identified in the monitoring that is not working properly, that should be further investigated on the type of action needed in the models to be executed. And my personal opinion would be, first of all, discard that an update on the model is needed before going to a redevelopment, given the implication that it has, not just for IRB models, but in all cases, it has implication in IT, in data, control functions, model governance. So if we can maintain good models for more time, it's worth it for the entities. Then, in case of redevelopment is needed, and look into the management of changes with the ECB, for example, more is better. So it's better to modify models once, but to re-evaluate the model end to end, to try to solve all the pending aspects, rather than do it by pieces in terms of the uses of resources. And finally, and linked to the IRB discussion, we have a very intrusive ECB while doing changes in models. So we need to be careful when modifying models in terms of the implication that it has in terms of ex ante or material changes management, and the time it actually implies to implement that model change in reality. So it has to be a balance, and it has to be something to take into account while looking to the changes that are needed in the models.
Okay, thank you. Then Ricardo, we can continue connecting model performance monitoring and the consistency between potentially innovative modeling and how to approach regulatory expectations, how to meet these regulatory expectations when you are innovating model development.
Yeah, so I think that Ruth already mentioned, so model performance is something critical for any risk model, not for regulatory models. It's a core component of any proper model risk management framework. And when we are talking of or about advanced modeling techniques, AI, now Gen AI, then a stricter monitoring is even more needed, more required. With regards to that consistency piece, and also looking into the regulatory developments when it comes to use these advanced techniques for IRB models, I agree with the supervisor's perspective that there are three core components that need to be taken into account when it comes to monitoring. The first one is not to look into only the overall performance of the model and putting attention in the subcomponents module, especially when it comes to complex model architectures. That's something quite important. Something that is very familiar for us, population drift, data drift in the features of the model. That's also quite needed. It's common sense, but sometimes it's put aside. And last but not least, the model usage. And I think that when it comes again to innovative modeling approaches, the perspective of the risk sanctioners, how well they understand the model, how comfortable they feel in that usage, the level of overrides, expert change in terms of inputs and outputs, that's really critical. A model that is not well understood by the users is not a model that can be considered fit for purpose. So I think that to ensure that consistency, and long story short, we don't need to see the monitoring as a compliance box. We need to see that more of a strategic lever to understand the models much better.
Okay. Then Remy, I think you can connect with the situation with low default portfolios. The methodological challenges are very important there. And I understand this is something that is extended to the model performance, and how you can, and what kind of levers you can trust to see how to keep this monitoring under control in specific portfolios.
Yeah, my own experience is more limited to this limited low default portfolio, and I don't have such a broad experience. So, and we are in the process of redeveloping them to be IRB compliant. We're still not finished. We're quite late in this process. So far we had a pretty simple, I would say, backtesting process, which worked well. I think we had very few redesigns, but we understand that we're going to have to relook at this whole process once we are finished with our redevelopment. So in a way, I'm going to escape your question by saying we're not ready yet, because we have not yet submitted these new low default portfolios. Mm-hmm. One thing I will add to, I think it's exactly what our experience in redesigning these models is extremely important. I'm talking about specialized lending and financial institutions models. It's extremely important that they are understood and well agreed with the people who are going to use them, because if not, they just don't make any sense. I mean, one thing you cannot do with this product is come up with statistical rules, and we are spending a lot of time making sure that the new models we're redeveloping are based on, as much as possible, on the experience of the bank, so that they stay robust as the previous ones were. I think we were quite satisfied with the performance. So I will stay there for
okay.
Yes.
Very good. It was a difficult question, I know. Arjan, your turn. Okay, the ECB has done its job in terms of simplification, tiering, and how to prioritize such a large number of findings. What's your view in terms of model risk management when dealing with such a large number of models and these very prescriptive requirements in terms of regulation? How is ING approaching this?
Well, I think the first thing that we're doing is trying to simplify the model landscape, as we're discussing here. Have more models move to SA, so then the level of scrutiny can be reduced. I think that's an important starting point. Another part is how can we keep the process simple? What was already mentioned before is that the process of making changes is quite slow, hard, and difficult. I think Ruud was even saying we shouldn't do too many updates. Well, I actually would like to go the other way around. Simplify the process so that we can make small updates more often rather than big updates once every couple of years. I think all of the banks are now struggling with very, very big redevelopments. But if we make the processes simpler and make the changes smaller, I think it will help us get back into control of the end-to-end process and also make sure that these models keep on adding value to the business. And yes, of course, we need to standardize our processes. We need to take the tiering into account, as you mentioned, and we need to automate. But the most important is have a simple end-to-end process, because that's the only way that you will be able to navigate this on the longer term.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move to the third block of questions of advanced modeling techniques, the use of external data, and how to deal with low default portfolios. This time, I think we will start with you, Ricardo. It's time to do a change here, and it's about automation and how these processes are being addressed within the banks in terms both of model development and also in terms of model validation. There are people thinking that this strict, let's say, regulatory compliance is implying that this is about tick boxing approaches in terms of checking that we are fulfilling all the regulatory requirements. It doesn't mean that I agree with that, but I would like you to tell what you think about that and what kind of initiatives you are running in terms of automation of processes.
Yeah, so the time to value of risk models is a key priority for us. We know that we are competing against new players, and their competitive advantage is that these new banks and fintechs can put in production models very quickly. So for us, that's a priority, and we have strong initiatives to automate model development, model validation, and model maintenance. That's clear. But this does not mean that we are naive. So it's clear that, especially for capital models, not everything can be automated. So there are many discussions with model owners, regulatory interpretations, discussion with the supervisors, with our colleagues from model validation, model audit, and so on, that cannot be fully automated. But we do believe that streamlining and automation, data pipelines, model development pipelines, monitoring dashboards, KPIs, and this kind of stuff can free up time for our modeling team for such discussions. So, in short, top priority, we think is a critical and a strategic lever for us to optimize the time to value, but we know that for regulatory models, things are not that simple.
Okay, Arjan, your turn. In terms of advanced modeling techniques, Gen AI, machine learning, in credit risk modeling, and how to balance innovation with regulatory expectations. What's your view on that?
So I agree with Remy that the Gen AI, machine learning can help us in the modeling pipeline. I am personally quite skeptical if we can use it in regulatory models directly, simply because the regulators have such a high bar on perfection, model explainability, model governance, where I think that those expectations cannot be met yet when we're using Gen AI or even machine learning. I think in credit risk modeling, there's much more use of doing these techniques in non-regulatory models, from early warning systems, acceptance scorecards, maybe even IFRS 9. within IRB, I am not that optimistic. And I think you cannot really go far beyond the feature engineering, risk driver selection, simply because I think the hurdle of getting regulatory approval is not worth it. Then I rather use those same scarce resources in other areas with a bigger return on investment.
Okay, Ruth, very specific question for the internal validation process. So this is about the new challenges you face when validating models that are using these new modeling techniques, again, Gen AI, machine learnings, in terms of process both for IRB and FS9 models. Is there any specific things, a big gap that banks must face in these days to address those challenges?
So aligned with Arjan's comment, the number of these type of techniques in IRB models that we have seen is very, very limited, given the appetite and the high standards that are being required by the ECB, both in terms of capabilities that have to be ensured, the context of the maintenance of that on an expectation of ECB, and also given the expectation on the internal validation function itself in terms of upskilling the team and also the additional requirements for internal validation. On IFRS 9, given the alignment expectation between IRB and IFRS 9, again, we have limited number of models following these techniques due to this alignment expectation. But in any case, from an internal validation perspective, we have reflect on this, relying on our knowledge on machine learning models for admission scorecards, knowing that we have to evolve our function in terms of explainability, backtesting, challenger models, sensitivity, standardization, also explainability, as Ricardo was saying. But we have room for improvement in order we go forward in the evaluation of new models in practical terms.
Okay, and last question for you, Remy, regarding the use of external data to develop both IRB models and FS9 models. What kind of challenges they have? I understand we have simplification in terms of standard approaches for IRB. It's not the case for FS9 models, so the problem will remain there in terms of how to improve or enrich your databases by using this external information.
Yeah, my view is that banks should use a lot more external data, particularly because I've worked from the low default portfolio standpoint. What I see is that there is a strange resistance within each bank, within my bank, but within many other banks in France in particular, to using external data, where I think it's a very good benchmark. I know that regulators don't necessarily agree or make it easy to use external data, but at least once you've done your modeling with your internal data, you can benchmark it and check, have a reality check. And that's particularly true in the models that I follow more closely, like project finance and object finance, commodities. These are international types of exposures, where I think getting data from more banks can validate, can give you a lot more strength in the data that you got from your own internal statistics. I don't know why there is so much resistance. Frankly, I can see it in each bank. I was recently at an EBA meeting. There were two representatives from ECB who didn't seem to know about global credit data, which is one of the providers of such data. I think it's too bad, because there's great strength in getting data from 20, 30 banks on the same type of exposures.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I think we have plenty of questions, but I think it's the time to open the discussion to the rest of the people, either here or people that are connected remotely. So your time for questions. If you want someone in specific to reply, to answer those questions, please let us know. If not, I will coordinate the people in charge, or if they are not really volunteering to answer the question, depending on the difficulty. So, any volunteer? Eduardo, come on, go ahead. Eduardo Avila from BBVA.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, the question is on, Ricardo mentioned the 494D, which is the article that opened the way for simplification and going to standard. Has a period of 3 years to be used. It's a no limitation process. So I guess that this is a game changer compared to the old process in which permanent partial use can last for years, right? So it is, and ECB is being very vocal on pushing, or inviting the banks for this use. I would like to know from the panel's view, how do you see this process? If I may, from my nice supervisor that is here. Thank you.
I will not reply.
Okay.
Because you know me.
Because I know you.
Let's
Exactly.
look for different views. You wanna take the answer or not, Steve?
I can comment.
You can start, and then
If you wish, I think Eduardo has reasonably said, yes, we're encouraging banks to consider simplifying their model landscape. So quite often, we'll generalize, we observe banks that we look at the bank and they have an insane number of models, and we credibly look at that and go, why do you need so many models? Surely you could merge some of those models together. So we're not saying any individual model should be simpler, we're saying the landscape should be simpler. And banks should embrace this opportunity. As you say, it is a window of time to embrace this opportunity. We are open to the conversation. So any bank can knock on the door and say, hey, we would like to avail of this. And we are actively encouraging boards to have a conscious conversation. And not just at executive level, but at board level, so that there is a conscious conversation at the board level on whether the model landscape should be simplified or not. Now, if they turn around and say, yes, we discussed internally and we considered that we want to be so complex, fine. Fine. That's you, as long as you made a conscious choice, that's your choice. Consider it. Okay. That is. I'm reflecting the common stance that's been echoed out there by the ECB at large.
So you'll decide on your complexity, and you cannot complain anymore once you take that decision. I understand you will.
If you want. My take from Stephen is that if you want to remain as you are right now, never complain again in the future, right?
That's the clear message, indeed. Okay, anything you would like to add on this?
No, I think following ECB requirement, we have thought on that, and we have took the action from last years on this regard. Similar to what you mentioned before, is something and an opportunity. In the past, thinking on internal models were linked to good models. Now we can have good models, but don't need directly to be in IRB. So it's an opportunity and a lesson learned as well.
I understand people are waiting for, let's say, the official approval on the strategy. So the choice is almost ready. Well, they are saying, look, this is what I want to implement. So the formal approval processes and the kind of feedback they can receive is still what is pending. Very good. More questions, please. Come on.
Because I think also the ECB needs to look into the...
Sorry,
No,
Adam.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think part of the conversation is also the level playing field, because one of the concerns there is that different banks are being, well, quote unquote, incentivized to simplify in a different way. Well, I think the level playing field between the European banks is quite important to take into account also from the ECB. If they are assessing one bank in a different way than another bank, that is also quite a challenge. And well, at least we have the perception that there's still some consistency to be taken into account there, also by the ECB. Because it is not as simple as Stefan was saying, it is your own choice. in practice.
That's the beauty of the decision. You have to bear in mind many implications that are there. We have Dwayne. Dwayne has a double role. I don't know, as a previous former supervisor or is now a different role.
Everything to all people. No, I was going to ask the panel actually, just given that.
Your phone, your thing is working.
Yeah, just given that discussion and the choices that institutions now have to make, lots of which will focus on things, Ruth, that you identified, and simplification. What do you think the unintended consequences might be for the institution? I guess I come from a long history of thinking that if banks can model something, it means they've got a good understanding of the data and good understanding of the portfolios. So I'm wondering if you can see what the unintended consequences might be of simplification and how we might mitigate against that.
Ricardo, this is your time.
So the easy one for me, right?
That's the easy one.
You're welcome.
No,
Thanks to Eduardo.
that's a good point, and this is something that came across in our discussions with our dear GST. So the fact that we are not in IRB or in certain portfolios does not mean that we don't have a proper model risk management framework. And we still need models for risk management. We still good data quality, not only because of BCBS 239. So this is something that is regulation, but we also need good data for managing the business and for managing risk. The same happens with scoring and rating models. We need those models for risk management, and we also have or need economic capital parameters, IFRS 9 parameters, which are regularly, as you all know, subject to very intense inspections as well. So we, at least, and Eduardo and I here are very aligned, we don't really believe that deviating for certain portfolios from the IRB standards hinders the quality of our models.
Arjam, you want to add anything on that easy question?
Of course, I agree that we still need to have good models also for other purposes. But there's also a reason why those models are not on IRB. So, if it would be easy to have them on IRB, I think most of us would put them on IRB. So I don't think it's completely fair to expect the same level of quality simply because of modelability and the size of the portfolios. We moved them to SA for a reason. But we still need to have a good quality of framework, a good decision-making process, a good governance, and good validation, for sure.
Thank you.
Anything else? Remy?
I can make a short comment that's not directly related to models, but it's the same issue that we just have with the new implementation of the finalization of Basel III, CR3 in Europe. We have situations where models are no longer authorized and are faced with what we think are simplifications that are going too far. So now we have to react internally. How do we deal with these situations where risky data sometimes it's not reflected properly. We've had interesting discussions on senior unsecured LGD at 40%. Is it always right? Maybe sometimes it's not sufficient. And sometimes, on the contrary, it is grossly exaggerated. I mean, one of my bugbears is the treatment of private insurance. It's been now ridiculously increased with the Basel III. So we do have to manage these new situations where we no longer can rely on models to assess risk correctly. And I'm not going to tell you we have a solution right now. We're busy implementing the new rules, and it's only coming as a consequence that we're going to have to do something about it. And we're not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
In my case, just to add one specific thing, very intense in Santander. So as you know, we are not Europe located itself, but we are multi-located. Most of it in Latin America and US, where internal models are not that spread. The ECB expectations are not that spread. So having good models for managing, for provisioning, is a relevant aspect, but that doesn't mean directly that we foresee going forward in IRB approaches on a jurisdiction where the local supervisor is not keen on that, because it has a clear implication in terms of competitiveness and is something key. Also is something intrinsic to our business, the join of different entities. You may see it in the future, Ricardo. And this is a challenging situation with IRB models in terms of quality, in terms of history of information. So it's something to bear in mind as well.
Good. More questions. Ivana from Santander.
Hello. I'm continuing with this discussion. I'm thinking about the use of more advanced techniques for management view. And do you think it is better to move our most material portfolios to standardize in order to improve the models that we use for management purposes, for application scores, or even for behavior scores?
So you mean that let's say regulation is limiting somehow
I agree with the colleagues there, and I think to use advanced techniques for IRB and also for IFRS 9 is complicated right now. So the question is if it is a good idea, no, to move to more standardized approach in order to be able to improve our management models that we use for application or also for behavior.
Yeah.
Flexibility, I think, is quite important, but not because of having advanced models. I think it's more about the competitive landscape. So if you are competing in the unsecured retail portfolios with neobanks, fintechs, and so on, and we all know that they are applying these techniques very aggressively, and we are constrained by IRB, that should be a factor to consider in the strategy. I wouldn't say that it's something per se, not to apply AI, we need to move to standardize, but it could be a factor to be considered within a more holistic strategy when it comes to analyze the competitive landscape.
Remy, Arjam, anything to add here? Ruth, anything you haven't said?
Well, Ivana mentioned the reference of big portfolios. That probably is where we find difficult to compete to this. But we need flexibility from the ECB, I think, because actually those main portfolios are the one that are always being looked by the ECB while looking to the IRB strategy. So even flexibility is a way, or is more flexibility on looking how these new techniques are embedded within the models. But we shouldn't be losing competitiveness for being on IRB.
Okay. More questions here? Then this is the time for the people that are connected remotely. So I don't know how we can channel those questions, but I understand there should be a procedure for them to ask. They can be shy because we cannot see them, so they are hidden. Well, I think you have more or less answered that question, but I would like you to elaborate or to recreate a bit those internal discussions on how to go to a standard, how to remain under IRB. This has been, let's say, a technical, economic discussion on the modelability on these things, or are there additional aspects more on regulation? Okay, we have many findings, we cannot cope with this. This means these portfolios will be under scrutiny forever because we have these weaknesses. So it's a bit of color in terms of illustrating those discussions. I think the answer you've given in terms, look, we don't have to develop IRB models to develop good models, good models to manage our risk, but I understand this is not something that starts now. It's something that started around 2008 and 2008, and I understand this history is also having its importance there. So, who is able to be very transparent in deciding and explaining the internal discussion you had, which is human. I understand this is not something to be hidden.
Yeah, and I can volunteer that within our bank, I may have mentioned it already, there is a great fatigue at the level of our top management with these models. I think they see the immense resources they require, the cost, huge cost to the bank, a lot of findings as a result, so not very happy with the results of these remodeling exercises. So my view is that our senior management has heard the simplification model from the simplification order or from the ECB, and they are taking it to heart. Sometimes maybe going a bit too fast, in my view, maybe, or we are trying to tell them, look, let's be careful about what we're doing. But yeah, the direction in the bank is certainly taking to heart the simplification and trying to get to the end of this process, which for the moment doesn't look.
The senior management having important, interesting, high appetite to simplification.
Yes.
Because of that fatigue or whatever, which is fully embedded into the decision of the bank. They are consciously deciding that simplification is the best way they can follow.
Certainly, that's what they would like, and not only for models, but other organization issues.
I believe that the EBA repair program has been fairly traumatic for certain institutions.
Yeah.
And that has led to a situation where it's very difficult to sit in front of your boss and explain that you have spent X millions in terms of fixing some IRB rating systems, and we still have 20 findings, out of which 4 are F4, 3 are F3, and so this is very difficult when there is a lot of pressure and a lot of hype in terms of AI, Gen AI, apply for risk, and so on. So this, together with the fact that the competitive landscape is changing dramatically, is leading to all this reflection as to when IRB is a competitive lever for the markets where we operate. So it's not a modeling issue only; it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
Totally. So, how long and how were the conversations? Very long, I would say. We started the conversation on the IRB strategy, not as terms of IRB strategy, long ago with the simplification. We are a complex bank, and we have been requested by GST long ago to simplify our landscape. There have been different levels for simplification, and for so this new CRR allow us to look to simplification on another way, which helps. But I wouldn't say it's just one specific meeting to decide everything. It has many conversations in P&L, in modelability, in characteristics, also is how we perceive the market in the future, also what you mentioned on obligations and a readiness for submission good models in line with the expectations. And it's not an easy answer.
Arjan, anything you would like to add?
No, I fully agree with the process so far. I think we also had our model landscape strategy more or less finished. This is 2.5 years ago, but we're still going through the movements of getting the ECB approval. I think we're almost there now, but it has been quite a challenging conversation internally and also with the ECB and GST.
Okay, I think we are done for this panel session. I think your turn, Daniel.
For closing?
Of closing.
No more questions?
I think so, and Alfred so.
Okay. Well, we will now proceed to close this IRB session, but it's not modeling, it's a lot of things around modeling. Again, thank you all participants, and I mean all participants who are connected and who are present here. I don't have the exactly figures, but I think 50% are joining from South America and 50% under EU umbrella. I'm not going to summarize all things that have been treated here, but there is a journey, so there is an opportunity for everyone. ECB is committed with simplification. Wherever each entity decide or not move on with moving their models, risk frameworks is always a must. The risk culture is always a must. Impact assessment in terms of model reliance, data availability, and everything should be done. Long-term consistency across risk and accounting and global strategy. So there are plenty of things to take in. So we will try to summarize all of this and share with you. This is not one shot. This is a journey. This is not one shot session. So there is an opportunity and leverage on the great experience that all of you have and the new technologies. We should keep going to improve what has been done so far and bring value to the financial institutions with simplification, flexibility, and all these features. So that's all for now. Thank you, and you're invited to a cocktail if you want to continue with discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Very good.
Tema no deja.